The plains had gone quiet in the way they do before a storm, when even the cottonwoods hold their breath and the grass lies still as pond water. Clouds bruised the sky in slow procession, swollen and whispering, drawing the dusk down early. Caleb Boone watched it build from the ridge above the Arroyo del Silo, that long-etched scar where water sometimes came through after heavy rain. He wasn't a man given to superstition, but something about the shape of that storm unnerved him. It curved low and hunched like an old grief. He'd spent the better part of 2 years riding fence and gathering strays on land that wasn't his, living in a sod cabin with a roof that whistled in the wind and a stove that smoked when the rain got in. His boots were cracked, his horse half-lame, and his soul bone-tired. But he kept to the work because silence suited him. That night, as thunder rolled out slow like a sermon, he saw the lightning strike. Not in the sky, but in the arroyo itself, right where a lone juniper tree crooked its back against the wind. The light snapped so bright it turned the world white, and when his vision cleared, he was already in the saddle, heading down the ridge. It wasn't until he reached the bottom that he saw her. She was crumpled among the sagebrush, her dress dark with mud, hair splayed like spilled ink across the broken earth. One hand clutched her side, the other was stained red to the wrist. The tree behind her was split clean in half, smoking. Caleb slid from his horse without a word, kneeled beside her, and touched 2 fingers to her throat. A pulse, thin but certain. He let out the breath he hadn't known he'd held. Her eyes opened then, gray as river stone, wide with confusion, rimmed with dirt. She looked at him as though she'd seen him before, though he was sure they'd never met. "Don't try to talk," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. He unbuckled his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She didn't speak, but her gaze stayed on him, steady and strange. He lifted her carefully, mindful of the wound on her side. She was light as a sack of feed and twice as still. Thunder cracked overhead as he tied her to the saddle before him and turned the horse toward his cabin, the storm giving chase like it had a score to settle. By the time they reached the low door, rain had begun to fall, hard and slantwise, needling their skin. He laid her down on the straw mattress, lit the oil lamp with trembling fingers, and saw her face for the first time in the flicker of firelight. She was older than he'd thought at first glance, maybe 30, maybe younger, worn down by whatever trail she'd followed to this place. There were bruises blooming beneath the dirt, a gash on her cheekbone, and something broken in the way her right leg bent. Caleb got to work. He was no doctor, but he'd mended men after stampedes and gunfights, stitched wounds on himself with nothing but a needle, whiskey, and grit. He cleaned the gash, set her leg, bound the rib with strips of old flannel. All the while she watched him, silent as snowfall. When she finally spoke, it was hours later, her voice dry as wind through old bones. "You shouldn't have brought me here. You'd be dead if I hadn't. Maybe I was supposed to be." Caleb didn't answer. He rinsed the blood from his hands and poured her a cup of water. She didn't drink it. "Name, Boone," he said, finally. She looked at him like she didn't understand names anymore. "Then you're not one of them," she whispered. "Them who?" She closed her eyes again and didn't answer. He didn't press. There was time for questions later, for now she was breathing. For now she was alive. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the land scrubbed raw and silvered with moonlight. Inside, Caleb sat at the foot of the bed, shotgun across his lap, listening to her breath. He did not yet know that finding her would change every mile of the trail ahead, that she had walked out of something dark, carrying the weight of it in her bones. That love, when it came, would come like lightning, but he knew this. She had fallen where the lightning fell, and for the first time in years, Caleb Boone did not fear the dark. The woman slept for 2 days, drifting in and out of fever, her face shifting with dreams that made her fists clench and her lips whisper things Caleb couldn't catch. He kept the fire going with what little wood he had left, kept her legs splinted, and fed her water by spoon when she was able. She had no name to give, not yet. When he asked again, her eyes turned distant like she'd wandered down some hallway in her mind and couldn't find her way back. Caleb let it be. Names weren't owed. They were offered when ready. On the 3rd morning, she sat up. "You live alone," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was stronger now, though roughened by something more than illness. Caleb nodded, pouring her a tin cup of coffee. He didn't hand it to her right away, just held it near and watched for the tremble in her fingers when she reached. She took the cup without spill. You get many storms like that. No, not like that. They sat in the quiet after, the way folks do when they're learning each other by degrees. Outside, the land was slow to recover. The arroyo still bore the scar of the strike, its cracked earth-blackened juniper tree split clean down the trunk. A single crow watched the cabin from a fence post, unmoving. Caleb went out early to chop wood, muscles stiff with sleep and too many days spent inside. The axe bit into the log clean and deep, and for a time that sound filled the morning, wood splitting, wind rustling through sedge. When he returned, she was on her feet, leaning hard against the wall, a blanket tied around her shoulders like a shawl. You're gonna undo the healing if you keep moving on it. I hate being still, she said. Caleb pulled off his gloves, set them on the table. I know the feeling. She didn't sit, just stared out the one crooked window like she was listening for something beyond the wind. They're still looking, she murmured. Who? She looked at him then, eyes hard now, as if weighing him again. Men who think they own things they don't, she said. Land, people, promises. Caleb felt a quiet burn in his chest. He'd known men like that. Worn their brands once until he'd learned better. You run far. Far enough to think I'd lost them, not far enough, I guess. He didn't ask more. She was speaking now, and that was enough, like coaxing a wild horse to touch your hand. Push too fast and it'd bolt. That evening they shared beans and biscuits by the hearth. The fire snapped low, painting shadows on the log walls. Why'd you help me? She asked. Caleb poked at the coals with the iron poker. Because you were hurt. Because I could. She studied him like she didn't believe the answer, like she'd lived too long in a world where help came with a price. Not everyone does. Not everyone's worth saving, Caleb said, but some are. You looked like someone who'd fought too long to be left behind. She said nothing after that, but later, when he offered the bed and made his place on the floor near the stove, she whispered, barely audible. My name's Lark. He didn't turn toward her. Just nodded once in the dark. It fit her somehow. Lark, a bird that sings at dawn. He lay there awake long after her breath grew slow with sleep, wondering what kind of storm she'd come from and what still hunted her through the trees. The snow came early that year, brushing over the plains like a hand stroking fever from a brow. It muted everything, sound, color, time. The world shrank to the cabin and the thin wisp of chimney smoke curling against a pale sky. Caleb patched the roof as best he could, stuffed rags in the cracks between logs, and checked the snares twice a day. Game had grown wary, scarce. Even the coyotes kept their distance, yipping only at dusk from the high ridges. Lark healed slowly. Her leg stayed bound in pine splint and cloth, but each morning she moved farther, steadier. She wouldn't use the cane he carved for her, but she kept it close anyway, as though it might become necessary again at any moment. They fell into rhythm without speaking on it. He gathered wood and skinned rabbits. She swept the dirt floor with a bunch of sagebrush, boiled coffee, stitched the sleeve of his shirt when it tore at the seam. They didn't speak often, but when they did, the words held weight. That scar on your jaw, she said one night, nodding at the raised line beneath his stubble. What gave it to you? Barbed wires. Cattle broke loose in a thunderstorm outside Cimarron. I went in after them. And got kicked for your trouble. He gave a small shrug, better me than the herd. She nodded like that made sense. Later, when she rolled her dress down to change the bandage on her ribs, he turned away to give her privacy. Still, in the mirror's reflection, he caught sight of the bruises, the healed-over burns along her side. Her past wasn't just carried in her eyes, it was etched into her skin. She caught him looking and didn't flinch. He liked matches, she said, and silence. Caleb said nothing. There was no comfort in words, not for pain like that. So he passed her the clean cloth, held the basin steady while she dabbed herself clean, and didn't look away when her hand trembled. That man, she asked, not looking at him. You ever kill one? Yes. She nodded again, not surprised. Not disturbed, just marked it in the ledger between them. Me too, she said. They sat long into the night, not speaking more. The stove cracked. Outside, the wind howled low, threading through the grass and the trees like it was searching for someone who didn't want to be found. Lark took to sleeping on the bed still, but she left a space beside her now, not invitation exactly, but no longer guarded either. Caleb stayed on the floor, not for lack of wanting, but because want alone wasn't enough. Trust had to build slow, like winter thaw. One morning he found her outside the door, barefoot in the snow, staring at the horizon. Her breath came in clouds, her shoulders were square. "They'll be coming soon," she said. He followed her gaze to where the land rose into ridgelines. "How do you know?" "I feel it, same way birds feel the shift in air before a storm." "Do you want to run again?" She shook her head. "I'm done running." He looked at her a long time. The skin of her arms was raised in goose flesh, her dress whipped in the wind like a flag too long tattered. "Then we stay, and we ready." For the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. They spent that day boarding windows, oiling guns, salting meat. She taught him knots he didn't know, ones meant to hold fast in rain or under pressure. He showed her how to load a rifle with one hand. When the sun sank and the world turned gold and then black, they sat together by the fire, the quiet no longer between them but around them. "You know," she said, voice soft, "I didn't think anyone would come, that night. When the lightning hit, I thought I'd lie there till the coyotes found me." He looked at her, firelight flickering in the hollows of her face. "And yet you're here." "I don't know what that means." "It means the storm didn't finish you." She looked at him a long while. "And you." "It means I was meant to find something in the ashes." Outside, the wind changed. In the distance, a rider's shape crested the hill, silhouetted by a winter moon, but neither of them flinched. They came at dawn. Not a full posse, just 3 men riding in formation with the ease of habit and violence. The lead wore a black hat with a red band and carried a shotgun across his saddle horn like a warning. The other 2 kept their eyes low but alert, the kind who did what they were told and liked it better when things got messy. Lark watched them through a crack in the boarded window, her breath shallow. The rifle Caleb had handed her resting against her knee. "That one," she said, pointing with a nod. "His name's Cass Ryland, used to run a freight company down near the Sabine. Then he figured out there's more money in flesh than timber." Caleb's jaw tightened, and the others. "Hired guns. Don't know their names, don't want to." They didn't wait to be invited. Ryland swung down from his horse, knocked once on the cabin door, then spoke loud and plain. "Lark, girl. You made a mistake coming this far north." Caleb stood behind the door, shotgun in hand, eyes on Lark. She gave no sign of fear, only nodded once. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I'm sure." She stepped forward and opened the door herself. The morning was all pale fire and frost. The men stared, surprised to see her upright, unbroken. "Lark," Ryland said, sounding half amused. "You're a hard woman to bury." "You keep trying the same hole," she replied. "Try digging deeper." He laughed, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Come on now, no need for blood, just come with us. Tell your friend here he can go back to whatever rock he came from." Caleb stepped into view, shotgun raised. Ryland's smile faltered. "This her man now?" he said, looking between them. "I don't belong to anyone," Lark said. "Least of all you." The moment cracked then, sharp as ice underfoot. Ryland drew first, but not fast enough. Caleb fired, and the lead shot caught him square in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the snow. The other 2 reached for their guns, but Lark was already moving. She dropped one with a shot that clipped the side of his neck. The third ran for his horse, but Caleb's second shot took the mount out from under him. The silence after was sudden, almost sacred. Ryland groaned where he lay, blood seeping dark through the white. Lark walked to him, calm, rifle lowered. "You should have stayed dead the first time you tried to kill me." He looked up at her, coughing, defiant even now. "You won't be safe, not ever. There's more of us, always more." "Then let them come," she said. She turned to Caleb, eyes unreadable. "You think less of me now." "No," he said. "I think you're still breathing. That's all that matters." They buried the dead ones beneath the cottonwoods. Ryland they left for the buzzards. That night, Lark didn't sleep in the bed alone. She didn't ask, and he didn't speak, but when she reached for him, he lay down beside her without hesitation. Her back against his chest, her breath steady. No hunger in it, just the need to be held. Outside, the moon rode high. The wind had quieted. Inside, two people who had lived too long in their own silence now shared a warmth no fire could offer. It was not the end of danger, but it was the start of something stronger. Spring came reluctant, as though the land wasn't sure it deserved warmth. Snowmelt traced new veins into the earth, and crocuses pushed up through frost-bitten soil like small declarations of survival. Lark moved easier now. The limp remained, but it had become part of her gait, sure and steady. She took to riding again, using Caleb's spare mare, a pale dappled thing with a wary eye and a strong back. They rode out together most mornings, checking traps, mending fence where the thaw had bowed posts loose. Sometimes they didn't speak for hours, but there was peace in the quiet, a peace made of presence. At night, they returned to the cabin. Sometimes they shared the bed, sometimes not. There was no pattern, no demand, only the comfort of knowing the other was near. One evening, while Caleb sharpened his knife by the fire, Lark stepped outside and didn't return for a long while. When she did, she carried something wrapped in buckskin, worn, sun-stained, tied with a strip of blue cloth. "This was my mother," she said, laying it on the table. Inside was a Bible, its cover soft with age, pages warped by time and rain. Tucked between Exodus and Ruth was a yellowed letter, edges frayed. She wrote it before she died, hid it in the false wall of our wagon. I didn't find it till years after. Caleb looked up at her. "You want me to read it?" "No. I want you to know I had something good once, before Ryland, before the selling and the running." She sat down slow, fingers tracing the letter like she still didn't fully believe it was real. She said to find someone who saw me clear. Not just the parts that hurt, someone who wouldn't flinch from the dark. Caleb set the knife down. "I see you." She looked up, tears not falling but there, trembling in the corners. "And I'm not afraid," he added. Something broke open between them then, not in a loud, rushing way, but like ice giving way to a river underneath. She reached across the table, took his hand. "Stay with me," she said. "I already have." They didn't speak of forever. The prairie didn't promise that. But in the fire's hush, in the scent of old pine and smoke, something sacred passed between them. Later that week, a family came through, migrants from farther west, their wagon axle cracked, ox near lame. Caleb helped fix the wheel. Lark shared what coffee and jerky they had. Before they rode on, the woman of the wagon looked at Lark with a knowing smile. "This your place?" she asked. Lark looked out at the wide, wild land. At the sky open enough for any past to drift away. "It is now," she said. The woman nodded. "Good, world needs more places like this, where the broken can rest." They watched the wagon roll on, a trail of dust lifting behind it. Caleb looked at Lark. "You think about leaving again?" She shook her head. "No, I've run long enough. This place, this quiet, it's earned." They walked back to the cabin side by side, steps slow, shoulders brushing. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet earth and cedar. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals high above the rim of the world. And for the first time, they both believed it might be safe to dream. The land had taken on its summer hush, that deep-breath stillness when even the birds paused their singing to rest in shadow. The fields buzzed with cicadas, and the heat lay heavy across the plains, settling into the bones of the earth. Lark rose before the sun most mornings now, stepping barefoot across the cool floor to draw water and tend the garden they'd started together. Tomatoes, beans, a row of struggling squash. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Caleb built a porch, then a smokehouse. He fixed the roof right proper with new planks milled downriver, rode in once a month to trade with the man who ran the store. They were known there only as Boone and the woman who came with him. Folks didn't ask more, and that suited them both fine. One night, under a sky so clear the stars looked stitched into it, Lark brought out the letter again. "I used to think I was meant to die that night," she said, her voice soft with memory, not sorrow. "That lightning was the end of me." Caleb sat beside her on the step, a cup of warm whiskey in hand. "I thought maybe I was meant to disappear out here, one more ghost with no marker." "But you found me," she said. "You were still breathing. That's all I needed to know." She looked over at him. There was a candle in the window behind them, its light falling across his face in gold and shadow. You remember what you said. That I looked like someone who'd fought too long to be left behind. I remember. I think maybe I was looking for someone who knew what that meant. He reached over then, not sudden, just steady, and took her hand. Held it without speaking. Her thumb brushed the scar beneath his jaw, the place where pain had once lived. You think it ever stops hurting? She asked. No, he said, but I think it gets quieter. And I think we get stronger than it. A coyote howled out on the ridge, and the night pressed in around them. Not a threat anymore, just a kind of song. Inside, the fire had burned low. The cabin stood solid now, walls chinked, roof sealed, smoke rising from the chimney like a signal no one else needed to read. Home, not made of stone or wood alone, but of presence, of choosing to stay. Later, Lark wrote something down in the margins of her mother's Bible, beneath the faded lines of Exodus. He found me where the lightning fell, and never feared the dark again. And that was how it came to be. Not through rescue, but recognition. Not through promises, but days lived one beside the other. The storm had passed, and in its place a quiet, steadfast love took root, tender as firelight, enduring as the open sky.